Hello, everyone, and welcome to Tech Leaders Hub, coming to you live for the third time this week. Super exciting week for Tech Leaders Hub. My guest today is Ender Yüksel, Director Development Manager at SimCorp. Ender, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much, Cuba, and thank you so much for the high energy introduction. That is really great to hear and to be here. And congratulations with your 3 episodes track. It's really great to hear. Kudos to you.
Thanks. Yeah, it's a first for Tech Leaders Hub, but they really kind of accumulated in this 1 week. If anybody's joining for the third day in a row, definitely leave a comment, okay? I want to see you and I want to celebrate you for sure. Dear watchers and listeners, welcome to Tech Leaders Hub. Whether you're watching live or whether you're watching the recording, we really appreciate you spending some time with us. Let us know that you can see us and hear us. If you're watching live, if it's the recording, you don't have to let us know. But if you're watching live, let us know that you can see us and you can hear us, so that we know that we are all good on the technical level. I'll be waiting for these comments to roll in. Meanwhile, Ender, I wanted to ask, who do you hope is tuning in today? You know, given the conversation we've got today lined up about hybrid work, the modern workforce, who do you think will benefit from listening to this conversation?
Right. So obviously, I would wish that it wouldn't be limited by the industry, by the position, by the location. So I would really wish that in the best of the worlds, it would be as generic as possible, meaning that you don't have to be a tech professional, or you don't have to be a engineer or tech leader or so on. But in any workplace, the topics that we are going to talk could be useful. I'm also excited about the fact that this this event, this session, has most likely its own listeners, and perhaps I'm bringing some of my listeners. So now I can't see the people, of course, but I'm so excited that we have the opportunity to reach out to more people. So that makes me very excited.
Yeah, exactly. That's true. Usually, there's a faithful Tech Leaders Hub audience here. One of those people is Paulina, saying all is good. Thank you, Paulina, for letting us know. Anybody else? Yeah, it's true. We can't see you, but if you leave a comment, we'll be able to see that, and we'll know that you're supporting the show. So thank you for that. All right, so that's, we're reaching a broad audience here. Certainly the topic is broadly applicable. So we'll get into that in just a sec. But before that, we gave people 3 minutes to join in. Anybody else will have to watch the recording. I wanted to ask Ender the traditional Tech Leaders Hub question, so that we start the stream with something that's immediately useful for our audience. So if you're ready for that, I'm going to start with that. Okay, so traditional Tech Leaders Hub question is, what is your number one tip for tech leaders?
Yes, and this is a really good question, at the same time a really hard question. So this is a traditional question from your side, but I hope I don't provide the traditional or typical answer. My personal number one tip is, even though it is tech and it is leadership that is on the front, don't omit the human side of technology. Therefore, try to understand the human psychology, um, things like team dynamics, as well as the preferences and motivators of the people around you, like what makes them tick. So that would be my answer.
Yeah, love that answer. And I'm tempted to dig in a little bit deeper here, especially about motivators. I was talking with a previous guest, actually, a few days ago. If you're watching, hi, you know who you are. And he was asking me about motivators. He was asking about how to motivate different types of people. I was wondering if you had any insight to share about that. When it comes to motivation and keeping it high in your team, do you have anything specific that kind of helps keep things human and keep people excited?
Yeah, so my approach is, first of all, to understand what makes people tick around you before, rushing with the motivator. Because
Uh-huh.
if you assume that people will be motivated with delivering more and more, and without probing around. You directly go and motivate them. We will deliver this and that will be great, kind of thing. Then, of course, you would not be motivating the people that are not motivated by that. And also, similarly, if you, for example, simply go for the purpose, high purpose, which is a great thing, but I think you need to be a little bit cautious about what makes people thrive at work. So when I have new employees and when I have one-on-one meetings with them, I typically, in our first one-on-one, I ask them, what makes you thrive at work? And I get very different answers. So I don't always get the typical answers like solving problems and different challenges, tackling with them. I also get different responses. In the flip side of that, I also have the reverse question, which is what drains your energy at work. And you can also make connections to that and relate to the motivators.
Okay, awesome. Yeah. This first one-on-one is so crucial. And I think a lot of the watchers and listeners might be taking this note right now, kind of in their notebooks or Google Docs or whatever. That it's good to ask about that. Ask about it directly instead of trying to kind of guess it between the lines, is what I'm getting here.
Exactly.
Yeah, of course. I love that answer, and it's going to the catalog of number one tips for tech leaders. We've had over 30 episodes already. We should turn that into a blog post sometime. It's somewhere in the backlog. So, dear fans, be excited for that in the future, near or far. All right. Remember, watchers and listeners, if you've got any questions, any comments whatsoever, leave them in the comments. The Q&A for this session will be continuous, so you don't have to wait for the end to ask your questions. In fact, at the end, we'll just do our announcements and then say our goodbyes. So definitely ask your questions along the way about anything we might be talking about here. Now, before we get to the topic of the session, hybrid work and the modern workforce and whatever else might result from that conversation, I wanted to ask a little bit about you, Ender. What can you tell us about your background, how it connects to the conversation here? What should people know about you in terms of your experience to put what we'll be talking about in some kind of context?
Yeah, that I hope I can provide the information in a short and timely fashion. I'm originally from Istanbul, Turkey, and computer engineering has been a popular major in my home country. At the same time, enjoying high rankings. So I had the privilege to study computer engineering at the Technical University of Istanbul, which is one of the oldest and prestigious institutions in the country. And I, during my master studies, I had the opportunity to visit the world-class experts in the field I was working for, which was formal verification, and that was in Denmark. So I had the opportunity, and I even liked it so much that I restarted my master thesis studies in Denmark, and it went very well. Then afterwards, I was accepted for PhD studies at the Technical University of Denmark. And during that studies, I also had a chance to visit and collaborate with world-class researchers. So this time I had a stay in the University of Oxford, and at that time my research expanded to quantitative verification, static code analysis, and an application of those in wireless sensor networks. After PhD, I actually enjoyed staying in the academia 3 more years, this time as a postdoctoral researcher, where we had an exciting research project, including major universities from Denmark and China on the topic of cyber-physical systems and security of them. As you can imagine, I was really happy with the life of a researcher, especially the freedom in choosing what you would like to work with, and collaborating with bright minds and from all over the world. And there's this sort of business model that you work on something, you have some improvement, but some experts in the field have to review that and then accept that and so on. and after that you need to present that to the community. And then one interesting thing happened. I received an offer to become an assistant professor, which is usually a great thing to happen in the life of a researcher. However, in my case, it made me lift up my head from the papers and look around and see what's going on. And I didn't want to continue like the research funding and publication and working overtime, especially in a country like Denmark where the work-life balance is very much favorable. That was the time that I moved to industry as a practitioner. Yeah, perhaps it was not a very conscious choice of the industry, but I have been working in the financial industry, the technology side of the financial industry. I worked in the major bank of Denmark called Danske Bank as a software engineer. I also worked in the security area at there. And then I moved to the current company I work for, SimCorp. And in SimCorp, I have been working on a lot of different areas in different positions. So perhaps I can talk a little bit about that now, if that would be okay.
Yeah, you know what? Before SimCorp, let me ask you one more question. Because obviously people want to find out about the company you're from. But there's one thing I'm curious about before that. So you got, quite far in your career to a director level position. I wanted to ask you who or what, I'm sure there's more than one thing or more than one person, but who or what helped you to get to this point?
Oh, that is a question that is very difficult to answer because at one side, when you say who or what, obviously I had my role models that I was looking up to, that I learned a lot from. I had my mentors that I was directly learning things from. But perhaps my answer would be it is yourself who is actually helping you to reach some level or not. And actually, in this company, and if we can generalize in this country, it is not like getting to that level. It's not like if you ask me, it's not like a big achievement because you're not really over the individual experts who actually are accomplished and prove themselves in any field. So that's one of the things I like in the Nordics. So when you are the manager or director, it's not necessarily meaning that you are dictating solutions or over people. There are a lot of established software engineers that are really good at their jobs and they are super influential. So I kind of deleted your question, but one thing is it's your role models, you look up to your mentors. Another thing is yourself, like how much you invest in yourself. And then again, I mean, it is, yeah. I mean, I don't know about a silver bullet, and thank you for the for the question. But for me, I didn't feel like okay, I achieved a lot of things or came to a big position. I just try to do my best for overarching goals of the company I work for.
I actually like that sentiment that the person that helped me get to where I am is primarily me, right? It's like that's something that you certainly can't forget. So thank you. That was an interesting answer to the question. Let's say a few words about SimCorp, definitely for the people who are curious, and then we'll get right into the kind of the main topic of our session. So what can you tell us about SimCorp, in a nutshell? People ask you at a party what SimCorp is about. What do you answer?
Yes, and avoiding a shameless self-promotion of the company, I would try to
Sure.
make it as concise as possible. So, SimCorp is a company that was founded in Copenhagen, Denmark in 1971, 51 years ago. And when it was founded, it was producing software. And that's, if you ask me, it's really amazing. Most of the big tech companies around the globe are not really are much younger than SimCorp, and I'm always amazed that SimCorp continues to contribute in the area still with the technology solutions and services. So what SimCorp does is producing mainly SimCorp Dimension, which is a software system for managing investments. And when we say this, we're talking about big organizations that are administrating a significant amount of wealth. That could be a pension fund. So we are all paying contributions to our future, the pension contributions. That could be insurance companies collecting money from their customers. That could be investment banks, wealth funds, so on. So basically, they need to invest this money, and we provide a system that they can manage their investments end to end. Of course, the purpose here that makes us proud and happy is we help people to have a better future, as hoping that using our system, the investments can be better managed by those organizations. The company is still, the headquarters is still in Copenhagen, Denmark. This is where I'm talking to you at the moment, but we have locations all over the world, and especially in 6, 7 different locations in Europe. We have software development centers. We do have a complex technology stack. We use different technologies, and the product is very big. Every single day, more than 700, 800 software professionals are contributing to the product.
Wow. Yeah, that's a lot. That is a huge scale, definitely. All right. Thank you. For everybody curious about SimCorp, definitely check them out and look it up a little bit more. And right now, I think without further ado, let's get to the main topic of the session. So I was wondering where to start with this topic, because we're going to be talking both about hybrid work and the modern workforce. So let me maybe ask you like this. Both of those things, I feel, have changed the way we work and the workplace significantly. So can you talk a little bit from your experience about how the workplace has changed as a result of both hybrid work and this new generation of workers coming in? Like, what is different now as compared to 5, 10, 15 years ago?
Very good question. I also don't know where to start, just like you mentioned in the beginning of the question. But let's say before COVID, things were much different, as it's obvious to us. But we were still working in an environment that we had teams in different parts of the world, and these teams had to talk to each other. And even though it's always nice to communicate in person, face to face, in the same physical location, it wasn't always the case. So therefore, online meetings has always have always been part of the work life. It's at least for me, and we always had like special equipment and even special rooms to make things easier. So now, for example, two of us are in different locations with you, and then there's people tuning in and listening to us. And this was not something super interesting in the past, even though I must admit, with COVID, it came to a level that a lot of people can easily switch between physical and online meetings and so on so forth. Another aspect of it is working from home and then working from anywhere. So working from home was also not a special thing for me and my colleagues in this company. We were able to work from home, and we even had colleagues with special agreements that were all the time working from home or a different location. Obviously, this also came to a very different level after COVID and during COVID. And even though you might hear some of the big players in the industry are sort of rolling back, increasing the number of days that they ask their employees to be present at the office, it is still something very big. And it's not theoretical, it's not just a talk. I mean, I handle cases where the employees are so much used to the super flexibility that any attempt to go a little bit back is not acceptable.
Yeah.
And that's also very much fair. And then there are also some slightly positive aspects of it, because, for example, when we're talking about hybrid, there is often some of us in the same location. Perhaps it is the office, and then there's the rest of us in different locations. And there was always this unfair situation of most of the discussion takes place in this physical place where we are together. It's easy for the participants to forget about. There's also some colleagues in the online call. This was
Yeah.
this was a dominant case before COVID. I have a feeling and observation that this improved during COVID. This got much better because suddenly you are all on the call. And even though these days we are trying to, get back to the office, um, and you can still see some of us in the meeting rooms, we try to be more aware of our colleagues in different locations. We try to remember them more and then try to ensure that the whole conversation or dominance doesn't take place in one place. There's a lot to talk about in this, and there's a lot of common learnings, but I'm sure you have a lot of great small questions as well.
I do. So you mentioned something that's really been on my mind because I mean this is something that's affected I think most companies, certainly the ones working in the digital space. In the case of SDX Next, for example, we were working primarily at the office right up until March 2020 when we switched to almost exclusively remote work, and now we're in this kind of hybrid model. So I am aware of the challenges that are involved here, and I wanted to actually connect with something that you said just now. The case where right now, I think more and more often it's going to be the case that some people are going to be working from the office because they like that, or on a particular day it's more practical. I'm at the office today because I'm streaming, for example. And some team members were at the office yesterday, so there was like 3 people at the office, 6 people were working remotely. And certainly conversations happen when you're at the office, conversations that are spontaneous. A project comes up, something that the other remote people should also know happens. Do you have any tried and tested ways to capture these conversations that are happening at the office? And basically, you mentioned that you have to remember the people that are remote. How do you make sure that you remember them? How do you keep them informed? What is a practical thing you can do to actually ensure that?
Right, super good questions. And it's actually at least 2 questions, so I hope I can remember them both. So the first thing is this, the conversations, like non-work conversations, or perhaps, byproduct of being together at the same
Mm-hmm.
place. Yes, that's very important, and the colleagues that are not present physically obviously can miss that. So some of us call these conversations as the water cooler conversations, mimicking that it
Uh-huh.
happens when people go and fetch water. Some of us call it like the coffee talks, or when you are in front of the espresso machines. So one tool is to mimic them in the online space, meaning that
Mm-hmm.
like every day at a certain time, which could be like in the afternoon, you can have a common like digital gathering or online meeting that you can call it the water cooler meeting or the coffee machine, and
Mm-hmm.
then you can sort of make sure that people attend and people don't really don't really talk about work, but talk about other things, so that the rest of the people also feel included. And here, I assume that we are implying the people that are working in very remote locations and really don't come to the office most of the time, which we also have such cases. And then I think your second question, Kuba, was how to make sure you remember your colleagues, how to make sure they have a fair airtime, and how to make sure they don't feel any disadvantage of being the online participant in a group of hybrid meeting. It is
certainly.
it is part of the facilitation. So I think facilitation was always an important art, if you ask me, but now it became more significant. So one part of facilitation is to make sure people have the chance to speak, and another part of the facilitation to have an eye on the participants. Like perhaps some of us is more silent. Why is that? And perhaps some of us is using more airtime that's not fair, and so on. So a little bit more conscious facilitation. I think that's one thing that I like the most. And if you ask me, that kind of awareness can also help in fully physical meetings. Like like you can also have a big meeting, everyone is present in person, but perhaps some people are not getting a fair talking time, air time, and so on. Yeah.
It's very interesting. Both your answers are. One thing that I got that's nice and actionable from this is I always during these sessions I'm like, okay, let's apply this immediately, and that's the kind of advice that I like the most. So if a lot of people are working remotely, maybe it could be like a recurring meeting on the calendar, right? Like 11 a.m. every day, water cooler conversation. Just give optional for everybody, of course. At least that's the way I see it. But everybody gets an opportunity to connect, even with the people that they don't have a project in common with. I feel like that could be hugely useful. So thank you for mentioning that. I think some of the watchers and listeners might end up using that. One thing I'm curious about here as well is because you mentioned how to kind of facilitate meetings, how to recreate the water cooler conversations. Another thing that's on my mind is how to keep the remote people properly informed. So, what I was also thinking about is that there's this spontaneous conversation and something important gets said. Do you have like a culture around it or like a practice that if something important gets said, what do you do to make sure that it gets then to everybody who might be involved in a project, also the remote people?
Super good and important point. So first of all, I have never worked in a fully remote company, meaning that like everyone is in a different location. You don't even have an office.
Yeah.
As far as I know from such companies, the documentation and keeping minutes and logs of everything, and even video recordings of every important meeting becomes important. Also, being able to search and find information, that also becomes very important. So in my workplace, it's not like that. So we have office locations, but of course, people can work from their home. All we expect from them is to work from the office like 2 days a week minimum. But we also, our second biggest location in terms of population or number of colleagues is actually Ukraine. And currently there is war. And currently our male colleagues cannot get out of the country, so we cannot meet them face to face. So of course this question is also valid for us. So they shouldn't miss any significant information. And if you ask me, they shouldn't miss any information. And I don't know of a silver bullet, but I think being aware of this fact, remembering that every time there is a decision, it should be logged and detailed somewhere. Every time, for example, it could be the software teams making architectural decisions, we have architectural design records, so everyone can go to the GitHub and read them. Similarly, whenever there are organizational decisions, you can find the detailed information in certain places. Even before hybrid work, we used wiki kind of structures, especially for the tech side. So it still continues. Now I don't want to name names, but there are amazing tools that you can use for communication, and which also makes you a little bit easier to search for communication and then start instant meetings with your colleagues. As I said, no silver bullet, and there is also the risk of overdoing things, which none of us would like to do so. But at least the awareness is key, if you ask me.
This is such a rabbit hole, you know? There's so much more we could explore this. And I do have a couple questions more. Before that, I just wanted to mention, I thought one thing that might be interesting is a lot of the people watching and listening, I'm sure you also are dealing with, the challenges of remote work or hybrid work or keeping up with documentation. I would like to open the floor to you as well, watchers and listeners. Leave a comment if you have any practices that are working for you particularly well. I would love to mention them on the stream and kind of enrich it with your suggestions. So anything that comes to your mind, leave a comment and we'll try to feature it on the stream. Okay, thank you. Now, following up, so we touched upon documentation, and I thought this might come up when it comes to dealing with some people working at the office, some people working remotely. Do you have any particular tips about how to structure documentation? By that, I mean, there must be a lot of notes from a lot of meetings for a lot of projects. So is there a particular way to think about how to structure them? Should it be more chronologically, by team, by project, by department? There's so many ways, I feel, to do that. Is there anything that you've seen work for you?
Yes, I have a super nice colleague. His name is Nas. If he's listening to the show, maybe he can say hi. And he is actually coaching us and guiding us in the topic of knowledge management. And it is a big thing. As I said, we are talking about hundreds of people in one area called the product development. And there's an abundance of knowledge. So it's not only to keep it up to date or making sure that there's content, it's also structuring it and making it easy to view and to get a quick overview and to find an information. So yeah, the quick answer is this is a standalone discipline, and getting help from people trained in this or professionals that would help a lot.
Okay. Yeah, I understand the idea of this quick answer. And sometimes what you really need is like a phrase that you can use to unlock more steps here. I never thought to label it knowledge management, though I have heard of the term. I suppose that's something that you're saying that there's like a dedicated person in your
Yes.
structure even for that.
Yes, yeah, and of course that person cannot have the time to help individuals or one by one, but at least helps in bringing structure. So for example, SharePoint sites shouldn't be an unfamiliar term to the listeners. I do hope you can do a lot of things with them. But if you have a structure and if all the product areas follow that structure, it makes life easier, because whatever product area you're looking into, you know where to find the information. And now that I already named the technology or tool, SharePoint, similar goes to tools like Slack, where you might have an abundance of channels, and each channel might have amazing information. But if you don't have much structure over that, some governance, luckily we do have, then of course it's easy to get lost in the information ocean, even though you have nice search facilities. And then of course there's this online whiteboarding tools which became very popular during COVID, also they got much more advanced. And I'm so happy that the tools are getting even better. So those whiteboarding tools are also full of information, but little bit structuring also helps, especially in terms of reaching the information.
Yeah, I totally agree. With the whiteboarding software, what I've seen work for us quite well is when you've got already some elements in place, like some areas on this virtual whiteboard. Here's where we're going to be voting. Here's where we're generating ideas. Because I think that the worst kind of starting point there is like a blank page and everybody comes up with their own system ad hoc. Yeah, I totally agree. That can be very useful. So, given that we do have kind of two topics to cover here, kind of two broad topics, I was thinking here's where we could put like a comma for hybrid work and revisit this in just a moment. And I wanted to also touch upon the second thing that we wanted to, the kind of the second broad topic and the second way that work has changed. And it was a very interesting part of our initial conversation when we were preparing for this session, the what we call the modern workforce, and very much connected with that is a different generation coming into the workforce with a different mindset, different expectations. So let's try and start unpacking that a little bit. What can you say about this new generation entering the workforce? How is it different, and how should leaders prepare for that?
Yeah, thank you, Kuba. So we are talking about Generation Z, and let's first start with how it is defined, because unfortunately there is no single definition of it, but roughly it is the generation that was born between mid 90s to early 2010 ish. So, or you can say 95 to 2012. And this generation started to get into the workforce recently. And we observed them differently in different countries. Like, for example, in the country that I'm working in, the number of generations at colleagues is low, whereas in some other locations we work with, like Ukraine, the number is high. But this generation is now in the workforce. And the previous generation is called the millennials. I'm also part of them. And when you look back about the generations, starting with silent generation, baby boomers, and so on, these generations are kind of profiled by the political and other developments. Like, for example, the baby boomers is after World War II, and when you look at the Generation Z, obviously when they were born, there was internet and computers, so this is something that doesn't come extra or special to them. And then there are a lot of studies about them. Especially you can hear reports from major consulting firms and so on. In SimCorp, we also a few years ago started to make some surveys and studies about that. Even though there are different findings, in general, we can say that the the Generation Z has different expectations compared to the previous generation. So I can dive a little bit into that, or maybe you have
Yeah, that
other.
seems like it seems like a great point to follow up on. How are the expectations here different? What might leaders be surprised by when talking with people from that generation?
Yeah, and then of course this is all generalization. So if our listeners have different experiences, I already say that I respect their experiences, and I would like to hear different experiences. But in our experience, we are talking about a generation that is not really um, really happy with just having a job and having a goal and mission in the job. So this generation is also conscious about their life and their time. They look for a better work-life balance. They are also concerned about bigger causes, like, for example, the sustainability, like hunger in the world. So working from home and flexibility is also important for them. It's at times it is even important than the remuneration, the compensation you are getting. And again, I'm not talking theoretically. I had experience and examples that there are things that are more important than having a respectable job or a good income and so on. So that is one thing. Another thing is, obviously, if you search on the internet, you can find a lot of tables that compares these generations, and you would of course see that this generation has, it's called, sometimes called technology native, and there are a lot
Yeah.
of more tools that they are using, and as a consequence they spend so much more time looking into different shapes of screens, and they can communicate more, and they can reach information faster, or they might have access to a lot of different channels. um, yeah, so if you have anything to add, just poke me. Otherwise, I can continue.
Yeah. So I'm curious. You've mentioned how this generation is different. Obviously, I mean, maybe not obviously, but the question that naturally comes to mind is how should leaders adapt? You know, what's going to be different working with such with people from that generation, and you know, what should leaders practically do to prepare for this?
Yes, thank you. So again, perhaps in this occasion, it's nice to give like practical, tangible tools that you can use. So maybe I can share
Yeah.
one practice from the company I work for, from SimCorp. Um, for managers and managers of managers, we have dashboards, which is embedded to your daily tool where you have access to a lot of different things. So
Hmm.
we have a diversity dashboard, and I'm so happy and proud about it. So this
Okay.
diversity dashboard, obviously we have certain policies behind it. So which diversity factors, because there can be many different factors. So which are our priorities, and what is our company goals. And even the company goals are refined in a way that these are the goals for teams up to this size, and these are the goals for teams above that size. Anyway, without distracting the topic, I can say that part of this dashboard is about generations. And then this dashboard tells me how many employees I have from which
Hmm.
generation. And then, of course,
Wow.
if I have knowledge about the different generations, way of looking at things, mindsets, and so on, then I can approach them differently. Obviously, for the youngest colleagues, regardless of their generation Z or the last bit of millennials, uh, you are a little bit more um, looking at it broadly. Like there's this concept of career ladder and career jungle I always like to talk about. So the
Right.
previous generations are very much into the perhaps the career ladder approach. So it is a ladder, it's steps. You want to go up, and perhaps if that's your strategy, then you need to do things in a certain way. But for the newer generations, the career jungle, trying different areas and then trying to find which suits you best, and do not seeing this as going up or down. So it's not like
Hmm.
promotion or demotion, but actually
Hmm.
trying different roles is something that is also interesting. And then, of course, for example, the the Generation Z, and we can also include millennials to that, are also interested. Like if the company I work for is paying attention to environment and sustainability, so are we doing something about that? And also the purpose of the company. And the pride and the LGBTQ plus rights and having diversity in the workforce. Perhaps more important than diversity, having the inclusion in the workforce. That is also something important for these colleagues.
Yes.
Another interesting bit is when we look at the generations, it isn't like, this generation is coming from that generation right before. So the generation Z is actually children of generation X. So it's not the previous generation, it's the generation before. And so it's always interesting, like if you have these variety in your teams, how it is their interaction and so on.
Yeah, exactly. So I feel like you've touched upon a lot of things that we can follow up on. Watchers and listeners, remember, if you're curious about any particular part of what Ender said, just ask a question. I'm going to I'm going to start from the top. Kind of chronologically, you mentioned the career jungle. I'm very glad you did. This is something that when you explained the concept to me on the previous conversation before the live stream, it really stuck with me. And I can see it's really true. For the people from the younger generations, even joining our marketing team, the conversation is less around how do you want to advance in this role, but what else would you like to try at SDXNX? I was wondering if you have any tips, from a leader's perspective, how to actually support this mindset when you're talking with somebody from that generation. Does that shape kind of how you talk about being promoted or how you talk about next career steps? Is there anything that you say or any questions that you ask that reflect this career jungle approach?
Right. I think before answering that, maybe I should mention one other thing. So I do have a tip, but for the leaders, for the managers of this younger colleagues and new generation. So it's not uncommon that the leaders, the managers could be a little bit more conservative in this topic. So if a young employee comes and says, okay, I want to try this other area, it might be the case that the manager might not be happy about that because you invested in the person for several years and then you expect that person to stay in that area for some more years, and you also expect that person to become an expert in that area and living happily ever after. But that is unfortunately not the case. So the first tip is to the leaders. So this trying different areas, trying different roles, trying rotations, different short-term, long-term assignments. It's all positive for the development and growth of your employee. So the leaders better be more supportive about that. And then back to the employees. Obviously, as I said, these are generalizations. But when we are talking about an employee that wants to experience the career jungle, then of course they also need to get well informed about the possibilities out there. So these experience and experiments are not supposed to be blind jumps and not so much well thought jumps. So for example, in my own career, I can share for what it's worth. The change from a software engineer to a Scrum Master was that sort of a change, because these are, even though you might be working with similar people and with similar teams, the role becomes very much different. And the difficult thing is you have a lot of ways of working or even habits that you accumulated from your previous role Now you need to unlearn some of them. Now you need to forget some of them and try to learn how to do things differently. And then in your next change, it's a cliche saying, but what brought you to this position is not guaranteed to bring you much further in your new position. So
Right.
it is a nice journey.
Definitely. Uh, you know, certainly that, when you transition from one type of position to another, there is going to be habits that are, useful to transfer, and then habits that are going to actually hold you back. I suppose the main challenge here is to identify which ones are which. And I'm going to kind of dare to add something on top of your answer here. What I like about the experiments we've run, something that's been popular with our juniors or entry level positions, is that I'm going to try and coin a phrase here. We treat them as more like a kind of all you can eat buffet kind of role. It's like a buffet. You enter into the organization, and there's a broad spectrum of responsibilities, and we don't expect you to do it all, but we do expect you to try it all and then let us know which ones resonated with you, and then we try to kind of steer you on that path. And we have various teams, various specialities, so you can go in, you can follow that path within STX Next, or within this company. But I feel like that really engages the new people, that they actually have a say in the direction that they're growing in, and the path is not set for them. It's like, here's the whole jungle, where do you want to go based on what you've seen so far? So I think that might be something that people might want to try.
I love it. I think it's great that you have such opportunities there. That's fantastic.
Yeah, it's we try to listen to our juniors and their needs. Any of our juniors watching this? Hi. All right. Okay, so we're kind of slowly getting almost to the end of our slot here, if you can believe it. So I wanted to ask if there's anything else that you wanted to add in terms of tips, practical things to do on top of what was already said in terms of working with Gen Z. Is there something, we haven't touched upon stuff like how to incorporate this communication of, what the company is doing in terms of sustainability, these, I suppose higher purpose kind of initiatives. Is there something here that can be done, or something else that's like an unexpected challenge with Gen Z? It's a general question because I want to leave you kind of a lot of space to answer. But is there anything else to pay attention to here? Is basically my question.
Very, very fair question. At the same time, I mean, I would also love to hear a good answer if there is any. And it
Sure.
depends on a lot of things. So, for example, I've been working in large corporations where we are talking about thousands of employees. And then, of course, it also, even though you prefer a flat hierarchy, it's not often the case. I mean, what I'm trying to say is trying to hear the Generation Z employees' views. It might not be that easy for senior management. So using any opportunity to do so is a good investment. I can suggest. Like again, another good practice that recently started in my company, and I appreciated a lot, is instead of this um, annual or semi-annual employee engagement surveys, now the employees are getting like much more frequent, shorter surveys. So instead of, let's say, 30, 40, 50 questions every 6 months, you're answering 5 to 10 questions, let's say, every month. And
Okay.
you don't have the fatigue from answering like lots of questions, lots of writing, lots of comments, and then the management is getting a pulse more often. That's one way, but then again, it's still not perhaps super ideal for the smaller companies, because if the company is a scale up or startup, then you still have the opportunity to be at the same call or at the same meeting room all together. So you have the opportunity to hear from everyone. Another thing is there can be a lot of work and tasks, perhaps not directly to your core business, that can be in, that can be a reason to empower the new generation. Another good example from SimCorp is every year we attend career fairs and then talk to candidates. And every year we typically have colleagues from human resources, and we don't actually call them human resources anymore. We call them people and culture. We typically have managers, and then we have engineers. This year we ran it completely with our youngest colleagues, and they made a stellar job, excellent job, and they know much better how to talk to students or new graduates. They know much better how to communicate the pluses, but also challenges, minuses, limitations. So employer branding is one area, but there might be a lot more areas that you can tap into the let's say, wisdom and knowledge also from your youngest colleagues. Another corporate practice is having employee resource groups. There is also good initiatives where you have a problem that you agree, and then you tap into the wisdom of your employees.
Now, that's very curious, and I'm going to use the last few minutes that we've got here to follow up on that. Employee resource groups. What is that actually? How does that work?
Yeah. So, for example, in the past, when I didn't have manager titles, I was trying to be able to contribute in different ways. Like, for example, when we were renovating our physical workplace to better fit to the agile software development teams, I was part of it, representing the employees and team members. When we had this works about the diversity and inclusion, again, we had work groups, composed of employees like myself, not really management. And then we were working on this and coming up with suggestions, coming up with initiatives. And there could be other things, like, for example, when you are trying to change your ways of working, instead of a top-down approach where you say, as management, we decided that we were changing to this.
Yeah, of course.
It is also good to have this resource groups that will contribute with their views. It also helps the ownership and getting better results. So there's a lot of positive sides to that.
Yeah, and I imagine the composition of these groups is crucial. But like you mentioned, involving the younger generation can only help. And for certain areas, like talking with universities, educational institutions, I can see that they can be actually the best people for the job.
Yeah,
So
they are.
but,
They are.
yeah,
Yes.
mention that. All right, Ender. I mean, much as I would love to continue the conversation, we're kind of almost at the end of our time here. Amazingly, we did have one comment coming in from YouTube. Somebody saying "Morning, everyone." Well, good morning. I suppose that's somebody from a different time zone. That's great to have you here, Star. If that's a name, not a nickname. But unfortunately, we're almost at the end of our session. So thanks for joining us. Either way, hopefully you'll watch the kind of rest of the recording. Meanwhile, Ender, that was a lot of knowledge in just one short 1 hour session. So I wanted to thank you a lot for sharing all of that. Unfortunately, it's like the time has run out to go even further or even deeper. We can follow up some other time, sure. Meanwhile, I wanted to leave some space for you to share any announcements you might have, anything you might want people to do. Okay, start saying they're from Trinidad. Okay, thank you. Thank you. Nice to have an international audience, to be sure. All right. So, what was I saying? Do you have any announcements for our audience? Anything they should do? Are you hiring? Do you want people to follow something, download something? Let us know.
Yeah. But first of all, thank you very much. It's a huge pleasure to be here, and thanks to the audience. And well, obviously, simcorp.com is our website, and we are almost always recruiting high potential people. So everyone is welcome to also contact me about opportunities. We support relocation. We help with work permit and residence permit and so on. And then, of course, I would like to repeat some of the things I started with. I really think that it's very important to pay attention to the human side of technology, and it became much more important after the COVID times. So take good care of your people, the tech leaders, and they will also in return take good care of the company.
All right. Thank you for mentioning all of that. And definitely, watchers and listeners, go to simcorp.com to learn more. It's worth following Ender on LinkedIn too and connecting. I'm sure if anybody has any questions, they might want to reach out and continue the conversation outside of Tech Leaders Hub. Now, for my side here, if anybody's meeting SDX Next for the first time through this session, hi, very nice to have you. SDX Next is the company that is bringing you Tech Leaders Hub. And we are, well, funnily enough, we are also a software development company. So that reminds me of the origins of SimCorp. What we do is we build digital products for businesses ranging from startups to corporations. If you've got a Python-based tech stack, then you should know that we have some of the best talent in Poland here in terms of developers, designers, DevOps, machine learning, agile, and much more. And we can help you build your product faster and better and make it more future-proof. So if you're curious about that, go to sdxnext.com and read about our services. There's also a blog there. There's more Tech Leaders Hub there. It's worth visiting. If you want more Tech Leaders Hub in your inbox, more Tech Leaders Hub on your LinkedIn, go to techleadershub.com. You can sign up for our newsletter. Follow SDX Next on LinkedIn, and you'll be informed about all future sessions. So there's a lot of ways you can stay connected with us. If you were to choose just one, follow us on LinkedIn. You'll be directed to all the rest through there. And that's what you might want to do to get more out of and to follow up after this conversation. And I suppose that's it. That's the very last point on the agenda, let's say. Thank you very much, watchers and listeners, for joining us. If anybody joined 3 days in a row, I hugely respect you, and really glad to have had the opportunity to have such an intense week of streaming here at Tech Leaders Hub. And I suppose that's it for today. Ender, anything to add before I click end broadcast?
Thanks again to everyone, and have a good day, good night, wherever you are.
Yeah. Or good morning.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. Great day to y'all, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.